Welcome back to Narrations. Tonight's story is about comedy and pain, the loneliness behind laughter, the complicated paths we take to heal, and the unexpected people who walk into our lives at the exact moment we need them. This is Funny People, 2009, a powerful story reminding us that the ones who make the world laugh are often the ones hurting the most. George Simmons is a comedy legend, a superstar whose face glows across billboards and movie posters, whose shows sell out instantly, whose late-night appearances draw roaring applause. He lives in a mansion overlooking the glittering Los Angeles skyline, surrounded by success, wealth, and fame that most comedians dream of. But the truth is hidden beneath the applause. When the curtains close and the laughter fades, George returns to an empty home. Huge rooms echo with silence. Screens replay moments from a past when life felt full. Old recordings of young George bursting with energy on stage, fearless, hungry, full of hope. He watches them alone, trying to remember the version of himself who once loved what he did. One day, after feeling unusually drained and weak, George visits his doctor for tests, expecting nothing serious. Instead, the doctor sits across from him and gently delivers news that knocks the breath from his body. A rare form of leukemia. An experimental treatment. No promises. George stares blankly, nodding as if he's hearing instructions for something unimportant. But inside, everything collapses. The world that once adored him suddenly feels unbearably small. He walks out of the hospital in a fog, driving home through blurry headlights and city noise that feels far away. He stands alone in front of his mirror that night, trying to rehearse a joke the way he's always done. But nothing comes. For the first time in his life, George Simmons has nothing funny to say. In a desperate attempt to feel something real again, he returns to the comedy club where he first started performing, a small, noisy room filled with struggling comics chasing the dream he already caught. He takes the stage, and instead of jokes, he begins talking honestly about life, regret, aging, and fear. The crowd laughs awkwardly at first, unsure if this is an act. But slowly they fall silent, sensing the pain beneath every word. Standing in the back of the room is Ira Wright, a young comedian whose life looks nothing like George's. He works long shifts at a deli, lives cramped in an apartment with 2 roommates, and performs stand-up for small audiences who rarely laugh. Ira dreams of becoming someone like George, someone whose words matter. Ira watches George with awe, struck by the raw vulnerability in his performance. Something deeper than humor, something painfully human. After the show, Ira gathers the courage to approach George. He stumbles through his words, offering genuine admiration instead of idolizing flattery. George listens quietly, sensing sincerity he hasn't felt around anyone in years. Days later, Ira receives a call he never expected. George wants to meet him. He asks Ira to help write jokes and eventually hires him as an assistant. Ira is stunned, terrified, grateful all at once. He sees it as a miracle. The door he spent years beating on has suddenly opened. Their early days together are awkward and uneven. George can be rude, impatient, and dismissive, while Ira bends over backward trying to prove he belongs in this world. But slowly, something shifts. George tells Ira the truth about his illness, something he has not shared with anyone else. He opens up about his fear of dying alone, his regrets, the broken relationships he left unresolved, the emptiness of success without connection. Ira listens, not as a fan, not as an employee, but as a person who genuinely cares. They write comedy together, not silly punchlines, but material filled with truth. Ira encourages George to stop hiding behind jokes, to face his emotions. George pushes Ira to perform honestly instead of trying to sound like other comedians. And somewhere between those conversations, the two become unlikely friends, bonded by vulnerability neither expected to share. George begins performing again, using the new material they write, painful, reflective, brutally honest jokes about illness and mortality. The laughter is different now. It's softer, deeper, filled with empathy rather than entertainment. The more time they spend together, the more Ira begins stepping into George's personal world, the doctor visits, the late-night breakdowns, the quiet moments of fear no one else ever sees. George tells Ira about Laura, the woman he once loved more than anything. He broke her heart years ago, believing fame mattered more. She moved on, married someone else, built a life away from Hollywood. But thinking about her now makes him confront the reality that love is the one thing he lost that he can't easily replace. Ira encourages him gently. "It's not too late to tell her how you feel." And George, for the first time in years, considers what it would mean to reach back into a life he threw away. Meanwhile, Ira's own life begins to change. Performing becomes stronger. He finds confidence he never had. But the imbalance in their friendship grows. George depends on Ira for emotional survival, and Ira gives everything he has, afraid that if he stops, the connection will disappear. George wakes one morning to a phone call, test results. The treatment shows signs of improvement. Suddenly there is a chance, a real possibility of survival. He sits quietly, processing the news, unsure what to feel. Not joy. Not relief. Something heavier, more complicated, because living means facing everything he spent years running from. Ira watches him closely, sensing the storm building inside. George decides there is one thing he must do while he still has the chance. He must see Laura again. He must know if the love he lost still has any place in the world that remains. And with Ira by his side, he sets out to rewrite the story he once abandoned. George and Ira drive north along the coastline toward Laura's home, the Pacific stretching endlessly beside them. The silence in the car says more than words. Two men sitting inside the weight of everything unsaid, everything unresolved. George rehearses what he will say under his breath, stopping halfway each time, terrified of sounding weak, terrified of sounding desperate, terrified of being honest. When they reach Laura's house, she steps outside, surprised to see George standing at her door after so many years, older, thinner, shaken, but softer somehow. For a moment, neither of them speaks. Their eyes hold the memory of a love that once burned bright, and the pain of a goodbye that was never fully healed. They sit together and talk quietly, carefully, gently. Laura listens as George tells her the truth about his illness, and the way it forced him to face his mistakes. She cries, realizing how close he came to disappearing without ever saying goodbye. And George, unable to hide behind humor anymore, admits that losing her is the regret he carries like a stone in his chest. Over the next few days, George and Ira stay at Laura's place, spending time with her young daughters, laughing at their jokes, helping with chores, learning a rhythm of life that feels real in a way George hasn't felt in years. The warmth surprises him. The simplicity disarms him. Laura's presence makes him feel seen again, not as a celebrity, but as a man. Outside the quiet bubble they build together, reality waits. Laura's marriage is fragile, stretched thin long before George arrived. Her husband, Clark, returns early from his business trip. The shock on his face when he sees George sitting with Laura at the kitchen table cracks through the fragile peace that's been holding everything up. Tension erupts, raw, messy, painful. Clark demands answers. Laura tries to explain. George tries to stay calm, but old wounds, jealousy, misunderstanding, and buried emotions spark into shouting. It becomes loud, chaotic, uncontrollable, two men fighting over a history neither can rewrite. Ira watches helplessly as everything collapses. Laura begs everyone to stop, but it's too late. The fragile thread snaps, and the family fractures under the weight of confrontation. George leaves the house bruised, humiliated, and broken in a way far deeper than illness ever touched him. The chance at reconciliation dissolves into silence. On the drive back home, George is quiet, staring out the window with hollow eyes, every mile bringing him further from the hope he thought he found. Ira finally speaks, voice shaking from weeks of swallowed frustration. He tells George the truth, that he treated Laura like a solution instead of a person, that he used Ira as emotional armor, and that he pushes everyone away then blames them for leaving. The words cut deep. George lashes back defensively, angry at himself but taking it out on Ira, mocking him, belittling his efforts, calling out insecurities he knows will hurt. Ira refuses to back down this time. The friendship that once felt like rescue now feels like suffocation. Their fight ends with George telling Ira to get out of the car. Ira stares at him, wounded beyond words, then quietly gathers his things and walks away, leaving George alone in his expensive silence, the exact place he feared most. In the weeks that follow, George tries to return to his old life, performing stand-up again, slipping back into the roles he once played. But something is different. The laughs sound hollow. The applause feels thin. The stage lights feel colder. He survived the illness, but healing is not the same thing as living. Ira throws himself into his own comedy, performing sharper, stronger, more honestly than before. The pain carved something true inside him. He gains confidence, earns respect, and begins to find his own voice instead of trying to imitate others. He learns to stand alone without clinging to someone else's shadow. One night, George attends Ira's show unannounced. He watches from the back as Ira delivers a brilliant set, honest, self-aware, funny in a way that carries weight. George sees the growth, the courage, the independence, and something inside him softens. He realizes that Ira was never just an assistant, he was a friend, the only person who stood beside him when he was drowning. After the show, George approaches Ira outside, awkward and unsure, humbled in a way fame never allowed him to be. He apologizes, not joking, not deflecting, simply saying he was wrong. He admits he didn't know how to be someone worth staying for. His voice is small, exposed, sincere. Ira listens, still hurt, but able now to see George clearly, not as a hero, not as a monster, but as a flawed human being trying to learn how to live differently. Their conversation is quiet, slow, careful. There is no dramatic reunion, no shouting, no embrace. Just honesty. They sit together at a diner late at night, sharing food, talking about jokes, writing bits on napkins just like they used to, but this time the balance is different. Two people, side by side, not one leading and the other following. A friendship rebuilt without dependency, without illusions, without hiding. George laughs. A real laugh, small and genuine, and Ira smiles without feeling pressure to fill silence. The moment is simple, ordinary, but filled with a peace neither had felt before. They leave the diner walking slowly into the quiet night, not as teacher and student, not as star and assistant, but as two imperfect men learning how to be human again. Because funny people isn't just about comedy, or illness or fame. It's about growth. It's about the people who walk into our lives when everything is falling apart. It's about learning that surviving is not enough, you have to live honestly, love honestly, and learn to stay when things are hard. And sometimes, the hardest and bravest thing a person can say is simply, "I'm sorry. Please stay." If you enjoyed this narration, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Narrations, where stories are told with heart, depth, and human truth.